Well, hey there. Welcome to my booth. My name's Jay, if we haven't met, and I work in VoiceOver. And working in VoiceOver, you submit a lot of auditions. So, here are some tips from me to you about auditioning. Tip number 1, auditioning is your job. Someone dropped this nugget of wisdom for me early on in my career, and they said to me, you as a voiceover performer, a voiceover artist, actor, whatever you want to call yourself, your job is auditioning. And if you book something, well, then that's just the cherry on top. And that was really, really valuable for me at the time. And it still is one of the things that I remind myself of every day. Because whether or not you book something, whether or not somebody gives you a shot, whether or not all of those things are out of your control. They come down to so many factors that you just can't do anything about. And so focusing on them isn't going to do any good for you. But what you can control is every time you get into the booth, the amount of auditions you're willing to submit, the amount of time you're willing to put in learning new things, trying new things out. And for me, when I started approaching each audition as an opportunity for me to learn something, to practice my craft, to get just a little bit better at what I was doing every single time, I not only started to book more, but I also started to have more fun. I started to I found getting in my booth much more rewarding every day. And I think that those things are just a really healthy way to approach a career that, frankly, can be really difficult at times, which you're not alone. So, auditioning is your job. Tip number 2, quality and quantity. At the end of the day, voiceover is somewhat a numbers game. The more people that hear your voice, the more auditions you submit, the more opportunities you have to book something. However, if you're just throwing garbage out the window at a rate that is admirable, somebody might buy your garbage, but people are going to be more interested if you're throwing gold nuggets out the window. So I think focusing more so on the quality of your auditions instead of the sheer number that you submit is going to be more valuable. Now, how can you up the quality of your auditions? There are a number of things that play into this that I'm still honing years into this career. It's a process that, again, every audition you can just get a little bit better. And some of those things are, of course, the equipment you're using, how well you've treated your space, how well you've adjusted the levels in your recordings, if you've done any post-processing. All of those things play into it, but the main thing is your performance, and it will always be your performance that determines the quality above anything else. And the main thing that will help your performance's quality is to just take a second and approach each audition mindfully and concertedly. With each audition, spend the time on it. And that doesn't mean you have to spend hours crafting the perfect audition. Quite the contrary. If you find yourself spending hours crafting the perfect audition, it's probably going to sound bad. In my experience, usually the first 1 to 3 auditions is the one that I end up sending in. And that's just because it sounds the most like me. But I've taken the time before I started recording to just set my mindset and be with this audition right now. So quality and quantity, they'll come together at some point, and you'll submit not only a lot of auditions, but a lot of really good sounding auditions. Tip number 3, which I think will help with that last one, who are you and who are you talking to? When you receive an audition, whether it's for a commercial, an animated show, a video game, an audiobook manuscript, taking a moment to decide what your point of view is and who you are specifically and why you're saying these words is really, really valuable. It helps to make your point of view really, really clear, because then it's easier to talk to the person who you're talking to, which is equally vital to decide upon in a really, really concrete and clear way. So for example, say I'm doing an ad for a coffee brand, some coffee beans, specialty roastery, something like that. I may choose to be a customer who really loves this coffee. And the person I'm talking to is someone who I think really needs to try these beans. Now, that someone could be my grandma. It could be my best friend. It could be a sibling. It could be my parents. It could be someone that I just walked by on the street and I just have to tell them about these coffee beans. Any of those choices may produce different results, and it may be fun to try different people that you're talking to as this character that I've adopted as the person who just loves these coffee beans. Now, I may also be, say, the coffee company themselves, or a spokesperson from the company talking to any number of those individuals. And in that case, it's the same process, but I just might have a slightly different point of view. So those two things, deciding who you are and who you're talking to, are going to make your points very, very clear, and it's going to make what you're saying alive and vibrant. Who are you? Who are you talking to? Tip number 4, stay positive. Now, this I think applies specifically to commercials most readily, but it can also factor in on other things. And really what it comes down to is if I'm listening to someone talking to me, I'm going to be much more interested in what they have to say and what they're telling me about if they're positive, if they're happy, if they're excited about it. And so if you're reading a commercial ad, I just try to set myself in a really positive mindset about whatever it is I'm talking about. Let's try this blind test. I'm going to say the same line from this Pampers ad, and I'm going to do one smiling and one not smiling, and see if you can hear the difference. Pampers, inspired by babies. Pampers, inspired by babies. Pampers, inspired by babies. Pampers, inspired by babies. Could you hear the difference? It's super duper subtle, but if you're smiling versus not, it makes a difference, and it can be the difference between you booking something or not. Breaths versus no breaths. This is something that a lot of beginning voiceover artists can get hung up on, and I was guilty of it myself. And it kind of depends on the genre, to be honest. But ultimately, you, me, anybody listening to this is a human being, and human beings breathe. And in voiceover, where the only thing that you have is the words you're saying, the silences in between them, and your breaths to convey information and feeling and emotion to whoever's listening to you, cutting out a third of your arsenal is a major decision. And so for things particularly with animation, video games, and audiobooks, breaths are part of your toolkit, and you need to use them to help you. So for example, in animation, if you think of movies and TV shows, the parts where you feel the most about how a character is feeling, where you feel that sympathetic or empathetic pull towards, oh man, are the moments in between when they're talking. And when they're talking, they're delivering information, and when they're not talking, you get to feel with them. And with voiceover, it's the same deal. When you're talking, I'm delivering information, but when I'm in between my phrases, in between the words that I'm saying, that's when you can start to feel with me. And those breaths are what's going to book you the job. It tells you so much about the character. So that was kind of a sad character, but at the same time, if I'm an angry guy and you have to leave your breaths in, or it doesn't sound like a person. The breaths are vital. And in audiobooks, the breaths give the audience, the listener, a moment to absorb what you're saying. It gives them an opportunity to breathe. So, for example, if I'm reading, say, an article, and I go, From classic cornbread dressing to a stuffing inspired by pizza, these are the dishes our readers always put on the Thanksgiving table. It sounds fine, but I didn't breathe. So if I just breathed where I naturally would, it gives you a moment to absorb what I've said and have a better experience ultimately. From classic cornbread dressing to a stuffing inspired by pizza, these are the dishes our readers always put on the Thanksgiving table. Now, granted, I zhuzhed up the performance a bit, but those little breaths in there give you a moment to absorb what I'm saying. And so for audiobooks, leaving breaths in is really vital and breathing naturally. Now, it is important to note that if you're gulping air, that can be kind of distracting. And that can be remedied by just letting yourself breathe naturally where you would. Now, commercials being sort of the exception to this breath is the ultimate artistic expression in that if you listen to commercials either here on YouTube or on TV or even on the radio, rarely will you hear breaths. And that's usually because there's other elements like music or something dubbed over top of them. So with commercials, usually the people listening to them like it clean. So you can, in those cases, turn down your breaths or cut them out of your recording if you want to go that extra mile. And I don't think anybody will be the wiser. Bonus tip! Tip number 6, check your work. After you've recorded everything, usually what I'll do is I'll record 3 takes, just sort of as I go. The first take, usually I'll make a mistake or two and just getting the words in my mouth and muscle memory. The next take's pretty clean, and then it might actually be awesome. And the third take is just kind of there for safety. After I've recorded those 3 takes, I'll go back and listen to them. At this point, I adopt a critical listening position where I imagine myself as just Joe Schmo walking through the grocery store, looking at cereal, and imagining this, whatever I've just recorded, coming over the loudspeaker. And if I find myself in the first 4 to 5 seconds really leaning in and going, oh, and listening, actually listening to what this person has to say, then I've done a good job. If, however, you find yourself zoning out, tuning out, drifting off, it might be worth giving it another shot. And I think it's worth reiterating that those first 4 to 5 seconds, you have to objectively, not listening to yourself as a artist, voiceover performer, but objectively as just a person listening to the thing, in the first 4 to 5 seconds, if you feel yourself pulled in by what you're saying, then it's a good sign. Now, caveat, that doesn't mean that you have to really yank somebody in there. You don't have to be aggressive about getting their attention. You don't have to be a car salesman about it to grab their attention. It just means be the person who you are and talk to the person who you're talking to. One shortcut that I was given that really helps me to hook the listener in those first few seconds is right before I start reading the actual copy itself, I'll just address the imaginary person that I'm talking to. And I'll say something like, hey, this coffee brand is really, really tasty, and I think you should try it. Or maybe something like, listen, this coffee brand is really tasty. I think you should give it a shot. Just something like that. Hey, listen, you know what I think? A little phrase like that really grounds me and isn't something that's written down on a page and just pulls me as the voice performer towards this imaginary person I'm talking to. I found that really, really helpful in those first 4 to 5 seconds in just engaging me in the text, which then in turn will engage whoever I'm talking to and the listener in turn. So that's it. Those are some tips for you to auditioning. Let me know if some of these are helpful, if you'd like to hear more. And of course, if you have any questions about this or anything else, drop me a line below or check me out on my website, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Until then, I'll catch you in the next one, and toodles.